Chapter 3. The Check-In. Meeting Smith and Jones. Kamau woke up with a start. He couldn't see. Everything was black. He couldn't move his hands. Am I dead? He muttered. No, sir, you are not dead. In the world? It was that overly friendly voice. He wondered to himself, did the fake fix-it man follow me into the afterlife? Kamau, you've got a nasty bump on your head. But don't worry, it will heal. Kamau's senses were beginning to work for him again. He opened and closed his eyes and realized that he could see. He was wearing a hood. He wiggled around a bit and realized that he could move, but his hands were bound. He also began to feel a throbbing in his forehead. After a lengthy pause, he asked, how do you know my name? You're Kamau Njama, son of Jabari and Iana Njama, oldest brother of Rafia Njama, Smith, and this is Jones. What a little brother. Little brother, he thought. Kamau was outraged and confused and relieved all at the same time. How was he going to call me little brother after kidnapping and blindfolding me? What in the world are they going to do to me? But he was alive, and that was a good sign. Kamau tried to settle his emotions and asked, where are you taking me? Smith replied cheerfully, we're going to the check-in. We have to be there at 09:30, and we have 2 more stops to make. Kamau had no idea what the check-in was, but he was getting answers. This was another good sign. He asked, why am I blindfolded? Can you take it off? Oh, no, sir. The location of the check-in is confidential. In fact, all the locations are confidential. It's for your own safety, sir. Sir, Kamau thought, who does this fool think he's talking to? I'm only 13 years old. What happened to my head? He asked. Well, Smith gave an embarrassed chuckle. We had a little mishap. We kicked in the door, and you were standing right in front of it, and you took a strike to the head. Not to worry, we stopped the bleeding and gave you a fresh bandage. He emphasized the word fresh, as though that were some sort of special accommodation. At this point, Kamau noticed that Jones never spoke. Is this a gimmick, he wondered? Is he supposed to be the quiet enforcer? Kamau couldn't figure out what these guys were after. They were friendly. They answered all his questions. They apologized for his bump on the head. He actually began to be worried for them. You know my father's name. Do you know who he is? Jabari Njama was not to be trifled with. When Kamau was very young, about 6 years old, an old woman was visiting her daughter and son-in-law, who happened to live in the Njama's neighborhood. She wanted some coffee one morning, so she ventured outside of the neighborhood oasis, which was a bit smaller back then. The immediate neighborhood was so nice and welcoming that the old woman didn't notice how dangerous the surrounding area was. She got her coffee and was headed back to her daughter's house when 3 hooligans tried to steal her purse. She resisted, and in short order, one of the delinquents threw a vicious haymaker and knocked her out cold. They made off with the purse, and she lay on the ground for some time before a good Samaritan came to her aid. The poor old lady suffered third-degree burns from that hot coffee, which had spilled in the assault. She also suffered head damage from the blow and a subsequent walking impairment. Needless to say, she never came to visit again. Her son-in-law and his 2 sons found the hooligans and beat them mercilessly. They broke 3 ribs, a leg, 4 knuckles in one of the boy's right hand, probably the one who threw the punch, and an eye socket. The son-in-law left them with a simple message. You straighten up or I'll kill you. Then he and his sons went home. This would have been the end of it, except that the 3 hooligans sold dope for little Poochie. Within a week, someone drove by the home on the old lady's daughter and fired 3 rounds into it. No one was hit, but the shooting took up the whole neighborhood. Many families started talking about relocating, especially those with young children. Other families were talking about going to war, especially the son-in-law, whose house was shot up. Over the next 3 days, the Njama's phone rang nonstop as Jabari worked to keep order in his corner of the world. And there was a constant stream of neighbors in and out of the house. It is from overhearing these conversations of neighbors that Kamau learned the story. After the 4th day, the phone calls and the traffic stopped. On the morning of the 4th day, Jabari and Rafiki went across town to meet with little Poochie. Jabari and Rafiki knew little Poochie. When Jabari had moved into the neighborhood, Little Poochie was just a kid, a low-level pusher that hung out with the drug-dealing gang. At the meeting, Jabari asked pointedly why he gave his boys permission to shoot up the neighborhood. By this time, Little Poochie was not little anymore. He was older, bigger, and now the head of a fairly large operation. Even at this meeting, he was flanked by two bodyguards. He arrogantly told Jabari that the agreement was broken when men from the neighborhood hospitalized his men. It didn't matter to him that they had attacked an old lady. According to Little Poochie, the only thing that mattered was that he was losing money while three dealers were hospitalized. Jabari asked how much money it would take to make up for his loss. Little Poochie told him $10,000. Jabari offered to meet him at a neutral location later that evening to settle his losses. 2 days later, Little Poochie and four of his bodyguards were found dead. Little Poochie had third-degree burns all over his face and head. It was believed that his head had been submerged in boiling water. He was also missing both of his hands. Two of the four bodyguards were shot, and the other two were strangled. For a week after the bodies were discovered, the Njamas were not available to speak with neighbors. It was rumored that they had gone away on vacation. Ironically, the Baharias and the family of the old lady took their respective vacations that same week. The local police didn't try too hard to solve the case. They were glad to be rid of a few low-level dealers. No one spoke of Little Poochie again. Smith answered Kamau's question cheerfully. Yes, sir. We know your father. He is a fine man, a great man. You should be very proud to have him as a father. At that moment, Kamau didn't feel the rage he normally felt towards his father. And he thought, my dad is going to wear you out when he gets you. The van came to an abrupt stop, and Kamau heard Smith and Jones get out. This must have been one of the stops Smith had talked about. Minutes later, they returned. Kamau felt something press against his right shoulder. It was another person. No one spoke, but Kamau could hear the muffled groans. Smith and Jones picked up a third person before finally arriving at the check-in. Surprisingly, Kamau was not as worried as he had been. With each moment that passed, he grew more confident that his father would find him. With each stop and each new person that Smith and Jones abducted, he knew his father would be more enraged. No, he wasn't worried. He pitied Smith and Jones. They were dead men. Kamau was ushered off the van, through a grassy outdoor area, and into a cold building. There were more men now, not just Smith and Jones. He heard multiple voices, but he could not determine how many. He was handled roughly and made to stand in position. It seemed as though he was being made to line up. The hood was snatched from Kamau's head. Bright lights blinded him momentarily, and a man with a deep voice commanded, State your name. State your first and last name, son. Kamau looked around hopelessly as he waited for his eyes to adjust to the brightness. A huge paw of a hand clasped his back, and another voice shouted, He's talking to you, soldier. Kamau stammered in his confusion. Oh, Kamau Njama. The man with the deep voice began to come into focus. Are you asking me, son? Don't you know your name? He could see more clearly now. The man with the deep voice was standing just inches from Kamau's right side. His face wore the same expressionless expression that his father often wore, and his question, wrapped in sarcasm, was this the type of question his father would ask? Kamau responded instinctively. Yes, sir. My name is Kamau Njama. Well, that's grand, son. It looks like you found your heart. I must be the wizard. He quickly snapped over to Kamau's left. It was just then that Kamau looked around. There was a room full of boys about Kamau's size. They stood in a circle, and all of them wore gold hoods. There were several men, some inside the circle and others outside of it. All were dressed like Smith and Jones. The man standing behind Kamau snatched the gold hood off the head of the person to Kamau's left. At the same time, the man with the deep voice commanded, State your first and last name, son. This went on as the man with the deep voice circled the room, commanding each person there. Each hood that was removed revealed a boy that looked to be about the same age as Kamau. As Kamau scanned the circle, he was amazed at the look of each boy. They looked flaccid, frightened, and frail. Most of them were skin and bones. There were a few portly fellows, but even they looked weak. Kamau had never seen himself as weak. He was athletic, very athletic. Even Coach Salter said so. Did he fit in with this pathetic lot? As he looked at the boys, they were contrasted against the men like Smith and Jones, who were thick faced, barrel chested men. Their clean shaven expressions were serious and determined. Kamau was uncertain, confused, and scared. Had he lost hope of his father coming to rescue him? No, he had forgotten it completely. As he surveyed the room, he saw a hand wave from across the circle. Hey, Kamau! Instantly, a tall, thin, and very light complected man was in that kid's face, barking questions and instructions. Did I give you permission to speak? Are you swatting at a fly? I give you permission to swat at my flies? Fly was minding his own business. Why did you terrorize that fly? Apologize. Not to me, son, to the fly. Give me 10 push ups. The poor boy tried to answer, but the minute he uttered any type of sound, he was smacked with another question. As the boy did his push ups, Kamau saw that it was Alton Bailey. Speaking of portly fellows, Alton and Kamau had met in the sixth grade at Washington Middle School. Kamau didn't dislike Alton, but he tried to keep distance from him. Alton was a hanger on. He always tried to hang out with Kamau, sidling up to him at lunch, in the hallway, after school. Kamau didn't like hanging out with unpopular kids. He had enough problems just being from a weird family. He didn't need questionable friends. Despite Kamau's borderline rudeness, Alton was fiercely loyal, always cheerful, always friendly. In his eyes, Kamau and Njama could do no wrong. His loyalty to Kamau went back to their first meeting. When Kamau and Imani were walking home one day, they saw two groups of boys fighting. As they got closer to the action, they saw it was actually one group of boys taking turns beating up one pudgy boy. The ringleader, Dorian, had been caught cheating on a test that day, and he had accused the pudgy boy, Alton, of snitching on him. No one believed it, of course. It was no secret that Dorian was not the sharpest pencil in the box. But this was his way of saving face after being embarrassed. As Dorian and his friends beat Alton, there were about 8 other boys and girls standing around watching. The lopsided fight, the kids who gathered to see the spectacle, the whole scene sickened Imani, and she urged Kamau to leave. But Kamau wouldn't leave. Instead, he dropped his books, stepped to the middle of the ruckus, right next to Alton, and squared up against one of the other boys. What are you doing? Dorian sneered. Me? Kamau replied. I'm about to beat the brakes off you and your boys. Dorian protested. This ain't none of your business, Njama. Kamau retorted. 4-on-1 is always my business. If you want me out of it, then you fight this boy fair, just you and him. Dorian agreed, and Kamau stepped back to join Imani in the crowd. He wanted to be sure the odds stayed even. Truth is, Alton should have gotten whooped by Dorian. He was already beaten very badly. One eye was swollen shut, his nose was bloody, and he was tired. But something in him wouldn't let him quit, and he fought. He fought Dorian so hard and beat him so badly that Dorian gave up bullying that day. When he was nearly defeated, Alton sat on Dorian and gave him open handed slaps until he apologized for the false accusation. Since that time, Alton has always been eager to offer Kamau whatever help he could. When Kamau and Imani left, she commented on what a nice thing Kamau had done for that pudgy boy. Kamau replied carelessly, I don't care anything about that pudgy boy. I just wanted to see Dorian get his. The moment he said it, he wished he could take it back. It was one of the few times he saw a look of shame and disappointment pass over Imani's face. As Alton finished his push ups and stood up, Kamau looked around the circle. He counted 19 boys, 20 including himself. He also recognized Amari. Amari also went to Washington Middle School. He had played basketball with Kamau just yesterday. Aside from Alton and Amari, Kamau didn't recognize any of the boys. Amari and Kamau made eye contact, but neither said a thing. Amari looked scared. He was a tough kid, a strong kid, and Kamau had never seen him afraid. Kamau wondered if he himself looked scared to the other boys. As he thought about this, one of the men came up behind Amari with something in his hand. Kamau wanted to warn him, but no words came out. His eyes grew large as the man raised something above Amari's head. Kamau nodded towards Amari vigorously, trying to get him to turn around. Then all of a sudden, everything went black. Section 2. Chocolates for Marlene. O'Leary. Timothy left his house hurriedly. He wanted to get to work before it got busy, and well before Dan arrived. When Daphne asked why he was in such a rush, he ignored her question Instead, he kissed her quickly and promised to see her that evening. Once he arrived, Timothy dropped his briefcase in his office, checked himself in the mirror, grabbed two packages, then headed to Dan's office. Marlene greeted him. Good morning, Timothy. He sang his name flirtatiously. He smiled confidently and tried to deepen his voice, losing the nasal whine. Good morning, Marlene. He stepped back to make a show of examining her. You are as beautiful as ever. The truth was, she was not beautiful. She was average. She did what she could. She kept a slim figure. She kept her hair styled nicely. She was always well dressed, but she was average. She was a 29-year-old white woman who looked like she would turn 40 any minute. Timothy kept his fraternization brief and as secretive as possible. He handed her one of the packages. As she opened the gold foil wrapper and squealed in delight. My goodness, this is the absolute best. It was a small box of expensive Belgian chocolates that sold for over $150 a box. The chocolate was very hard to get in the US. Marlene took one of the chocolates and groaned as she savored it. Timothy watched her swoon over the chocolates and thought, I've got her. She's still mine. Over the years, he had made a study of Marlene. He watched and listened to her closely. He knew her motivations, drives, and desires, but he was careful not to let his work life get messy. He asked coolly, Is Dan in yet? She grinned at him. No, not yet. He shouldn't be in for another hour. He looked disappointed. Okay. I thought he might be working early for a few weeks or so. He said he was working on a project that could mean a big move up. Marlene's eyes got big. He told you about that? Timothy replied matter-of-factly. Well, he didn't give me any details. He just said it was a big project that might very well result in a promotion. I wish he had told me. I might be able to help. Marlene pursed her lips and thought for a moment. He knew that Timothy was the key to any credibility Dan had as a scientist. More important than that, if Dan got a promotion, then so would she. He could not mess this up. Besides, Timothy was fiercely loyal. Why did he not include Timothy in the planning? She wondered. Then she spoke. Well, I don't know the details of the project, but I do know this. He is taking the lead on a project that involves SCV Fitzroy. Did you know that it was viable? No, I didn't know, he replied in shocked amazement. Well, it is. It has been viable for just under a year. It completed its first voyage about 9 months ago. The second voyage is being planned now. Dan is in charge of the mission. Timothy's eyes grew large and his mouth hung open. That is huge. I don't know how I can help with that. If you think of anything, let me know. Marlene stood there nodding. Yeah, it's a big deal. She eyed the file of papers in Timothy's hand. Is that for Dan? Timothy stared blankly. Oh, I almost forgot. He handed the file to her and absent-mindedly turned to walk away. Wow. As Timothy walked away, he processed what Marlene had shared with him. He was not quite as surprised as he made out. Space Expeditionary Vehicle SEV Fitzroy was a project that had been in development for some time. It drew on theoretical ideas of fourth dimensional structures and closed time-like curves to support manned interstellar space travel. Timothy knew all of this. What he did not know was that Tech Enogen had been preparing to launch a mission within the coming months. Why had Dan kept me out of the loop? He wondered. Is he going to cut me off? Section 3. Kamau's mini tests. Kamau felt himself being pushed and shoved this way and that by a mass of bodies. He couldn't see a thing, and he tried to take slow, small steps to avoid hurting himself, but this only made the shoving worse. Someone grabbed his arm and jerked him roughly to the right, then let him go, and he stood still. A gruff voice barked, Take off your shirt! Is that for me? He thought. Kamau stood there motionless, staring into blackness, unsure of what to do. The voice barked again. I'm talking to you, Njama. Make it quick! Kamau pulled his shirt over his head. Instantly, he felt a cold piece of ice pressed against his chest, and he flinched. Again came the barking. Stand still, Njama. Who do you think you are, Beyonce? Michael Jackson? He wasn't sure if he was supposed to respond. Uncertain, Kamau whimpered weakly. No? What's the matter with you, boy? Speak up like a man. He tried more forcefully. No? Then you stand still. This ain't Soul Train. We don't want to see you gyrating and dancing about. Take a seat. Kamau found himself thrust forcefully back into a chair. His arms were pushed down to the arms of the chair. He heard fabric being pulled and felt his arms being strapped down. He was beginning to panic. What in the world? He thought. A soothing feminine voice began to speak. Hold still. This is only going to. The woman was interrupted by the barking voice. Don't you cry, Njama. I hate tears. Kamau felt hot breath against his hood and tried to move his head away. Tears are a sign of weakness. I hate weakness. The barking voice seemed to growl out the word hate. Kamau felt a shooting pain in his arm. They were stabbing him. He cried out, Stop it! Don't quit! I told you not to cry, Njama. Son, I want you to dig deep and find your kahunas. Dignify yourself while watching. Kamau felt woozy. The pain subsided. Kamau stopped crying aloud, and he listened. Were people watching? He thought. He felt wetness on his arm, and the feminine voice said kindly, That's it. Kamau felt a bandage being stuck on his arm, and he thought, That was a shot. They must have given me a shot. Initially, he was relieved that he had not been stabbed. Then he began to worry. What kind of shot did they give me? Kamau's hood was snatched off, and he was hit in the face with a blinding light. Closed his eyes to protect them from the light. Kamau heard a small motor snap on. It whirred like a small saw or rotary tool. It was just behind his head. Are they going to cut me? He thought, and his eyes clenched tight. He lurched his shoulders and thrust his head forward, trying to move his head away from the sound of the drill. The man with the barking voice grabbed his chin, forcing his head upward. Hold still. You don't want to hurt yourself, son. Kamau felt cold steel at the base of his neck, and hair began falling on his back. For a moment, he relaxed. They're cutting my hair. Anger jerked him alert. Don't tell them they could cut my hair. Kamau took pride in his high and tight fade. It helped to hide the shape of his head, which he didn't really like. Besides that, Imani once told him that the high and tight made him look handsome, so he had worn that hairstyle ever since. Now, however, he felt helpless. He didn't know what was going on, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Big clumps of hair brushed from Kamau's chest and back. The small bits stuck with him. The hood was pulled roughly back over his head and clinched tight. The straps on his arm were released, and someone pulled Kamau to his feet. Kamau was given his shirt and told to put it back on. He was marched around, picked up, pushed down, poked, prodded, dressed, and undressed. He couldn't see a thing. The hair made him itch terribly. The barking voice yelled at him constantly. This went on for hours, and he was getting very sleepy. Finally, Kamau was led to a chair and told to sit down. There was a table in front of the chair. He heard a door slam behind him. He waited for a moment to see if anyone might speak. No one did. Kamau lay his head on the table to rest. Almost instantly, the door opened. The barking voice began again. Njama, I certainly hope you are not sleepy, son. Sleep is a luxury that you cannot afford. With that, the hood was yanked off Kamau's head. He began to turn to see who was behind him. The barking voice yelled at him, hot breath on his neck. Eyes front, Njama. This man wants to talk to you. Just then, a man wearing a white lab coat came into view. A hologram of a stack of cards appeared between them. The man in the white coat made a gesture. Then the card on top of the holographic deck appeared. What do you see? Njama looked at the hologram in amazement. He had never seen a hologram in real life before. The man repeated, Njama, what do you see? Snapping himself alert, Kamau replied, Two men sitting at a fire. Without responding, the man appeared to type in the air, but there was no keyboard, not even a holographic one. He gestured again, turning over another card. What do you see? Two witches playing patty cake? The barking voice scolded him. He's asking the questions, Njama. You give answers. After going through a set of cards, the man in the lab coat gave Kamau a pencil and a multiple choice test. He put a clock on the table and said, Answer as many questions as you can in 15 minutes. This went on for quite a while. The man in the lab coat gave Kamau a series of tests. He administered one test where wires were attached to Kamau's chest and head, and Kamau was asked a series of questions. He did another test where he told Kamau to read a holographic paragraph, then had him answer questions and spit in a series of vials. Kamau was exhausted by the stress of it all. After a time, he could barely stay awake. Finally, the man in the lab coat motioned to the man with the barking voice, who then left. The man with the lab coat then began packing his briefcase. The man with the barking voice returned with a woman who was carrying a plate of hot cookies. The man with the briefcase looked at Kamau and asked, Are you hungry? Kamau eyed the cookies greedily. His mouth began to water and his stomach rumbled. He replied, Yes. You can have this cookie tray now, or you can wait an hour or so for more cookies and a full meal. Kamau looked at the man distrustfully. So if I eat these cookies now, then I won't be able to eat a full meal later? No, there won't be time. The option seemed silly to Kamau. Who wants cookies in place of a meal? Kamau smirked. I'll wait. The man in the lab coat said absentmindedly, Oh, I forgot one thing. Then he stepped out of the room. The woman set the cookies down, and together she and the man with the barking voice left the room after him. About 15 minutes later, the barking man returned. He handed Kamau a brown paper bag and spoke normally for the first time. When I leave the room, take off all your clothes and put them on the table. Put on the clothes that are in the brown bag. While you are dressing, the door will be locked and you will have privacy. When you are finished, come out and wait with the others. Kamau was too exhausted to protest, too exhausted to think, too exhausted to try to figure out what was going on. So without protesting, without thinking, without understanding what was going on, he simply did what he was told. Every article of clothing he needed was in that bag, even underwear, socks, and boots. Every article of clothing was just his size. When he emerged from the room, he was ushered to a large open room, the room where the boys first stood in a circle. For 10 minutes, he stood in that room, as there was nowhere to sit. One by one, the other boys gathered. Each of them looked confused and exhausted and wore the same exact clothes: black cargo pants, gray t shirts, black shirts that almost felt like jackets, black socks, and black boots. All the boys were dressed like Smith and Jones. When all 20 boys had returned, the man with the deep voice stood and commanded, Eyes front! All the men stopped what they were doing and turned to face him. Seeing this, the boys did so too. He continued, Baba Thulani, form this rabble into a line. The man Kamau first knew as Smith stepped forward and began organizing the boys into a straight line. Some of the other men moved to tables arranged in a semicircle around the room. Others stood in line with the boys. Once the line was formed, Smith turned to the man with the deep voice. Line formed, Baba Ojore. Baba Thulani, lead the forlorn to their provisions. Smith directed one of the boys at the end of the line to move towards the first table. At the first table, the boys each picked up a carryall: 4 sets of t-shirts, pants, and shirts. At the second table, they picked up socks and underwear. At the third table, they picked up soap, toothpaste, toothbrush, dental floss, and deodorant. This went on until they had visited all the tables and received all provisions. They scrambled to get in line. This time, Kamau found himself at the end of the line. The man with the deep voice stood and commanded again. Eyes front! The men snapped to attention. Even those behind the table stopped their work, stood, and faced the man with the deep voice. For the first time, Kamau took notice of this man. He was medium height, slightly shorter than Kamau's father. He was thickly built, broad-shouldered, and barrel-chested. Even his legs looked like tree trunks. He was not overly muscular like Jones, or one of those celebrity tough guys. This man was a real tough guy, and it was clear to Kamau that he was not to be crossed. I am Baba Ojore, he commanded. Say it with me. The boys repeated, Baba Ojore. Their response was soft, uncertain, and out of unison. Let's try it again. This time, say it like you care. I am Baba Ojore. Kamau and the other boys repeated, Baba Ojore. This time they were louder and more confident. Baba Ojore continued, Welcome to the Vanguard Order. Kamau's head jerked up in surprise. His mouth fell open and his eyes grew wide. It all became clear to him now. This is the Aket? Anger welled up in his chest. I'm not supposed to be here, he thought. Then one realization after another hit him. His father was not going to come to his rescue. He was not going to live with Grandma Charlene. He was not going to work at Gary's greenhouse this summer, and he was not going to Coach Salter's basketball camp. His eyes narrowed, and he began breathing heavily. He wanted to strike out and hit people and break things. But he didn't dare do that, not with Baba Ojore and Smith and Jones and those other men in the room. For the next 10 weeks, you will enjoy a fun-filled, all-expense-paid vacation at Camp Furaha. You will each have your own personalized sleeping quarters. You will enjoy the best meal accommodations. The Aket staff will provide you with 3 square meals a day. As Baba Ojore spoke, his voice was smiling, if that's possible, but his face was stern and expressionless. He stood straight as an arrow, looked up and down the line, and making eye contact with each of the boys. You will have access to comprehensive recreation facilities, and you will enjoy unlimited recreation opportunities. Kamau looked down the line and noticed that some of the boys were smiling and nodding agreeably. Baba Ojore continued. You will enjoy the challenge of Vanguard games, the camaraderie of Vanguard brotherhood, and the joy of self-discovery that is part of the Vanguard experience. Baba Ojore paused and looked at the boys. Are there any questions? Before he finished uttering the word questions, he went on. Very well then. Say goodbye to your mothers and prepare to depart. Baba Thulani, lead the forlorn to the bus. Kamau wondered what he meant by say goodbye to your mothers. Were they supposed to call? Write a letter? Maybe this was just a figure of speech. While Kamau was wondering, Baba Thulani walked by Kamau and commanded, This way. Following, Kamau led the boys out of a side door. Each boy held a carryall and followed the boy ahead of him. The building exit led the line of boys between two ropes, like the lines at amusement parks. Kamau walked to the point where the ropes ended. There was Jones, blocking the path to the bus. So Kamau and the line of boys stopped. As Kamau stood there, waiting and staring into Jones' broad chest, he noticed Baba Thulani walking towards him, accompanied by a woman. It was his mother. Kamau's heart jumped inside of his chest. She had finally stood up to Mr. Njama and was going to put an end to this madness. He would see how hungry and upset Kamau was. She would see how these monsters had butchered his hair and terrorized him, and he would be going home. As she approached, he began to speak. Ma, I'm so... He interrupted him hurriedly. Mao, listen. You are going to face many challenges over the next 10 weeks. You have within you everything you need to meet those challenges, and you have around you everything you need to grow from those challenges. Go and come back home the man that you were born to be. With that, Ayana Njama opened her arms. Kamau moved to hug his mother and to beg her to let him come home. But Baba Thulani stepped between them. No hugs, Mom. The course is set. Ayana Njama stepped back and dropped her mask of impassivity. She let Kamau see all her love, hope, and admiration. Be strong, son. Kamau's heart sank. Once she turned, Jones said flatly, Board the bus. Dejected, Kamau approached the bus, gripped his carryall, and watched his mother walk towards her car. He reflected that she knew this whole time. She didn't try to help me. Then Kamau saw a small head in the passenger seat of the car. Peering out of the side window, his eyes narrowed. Is that? It's Grandma Charlene. Section 4. The Bus Ride. One at a time, the boys said their final goodbyes to their mothers and boarded the bus. Their goodbyes were brief. There were no hugs. There was no crying. There were no drawn-out speeches. Once on the bus, the boys did not speak. Each boy sat there, staring off into space. Soon the bus was loaded. A few of the men got on with the boys, and they were off. As the bus began rolling, Jones walked the aisle and gave each boy a gold hood. Put these on, he commanded. Kamau was too tired to protest. He put the hood on, and fell asleep within minutes. The bus ride was the longest, most boring, and strangest bus ride that Kamau had ever experienced. When the ride began, it was 10:30 a.m. He knew it was 10:30 because he caught a peek at Jones' watch as he was handing out the gold hoods. Kamau was surprised that it was only 10:30. The morning was long and harrowing. It felt like it was much later in the day. The bus made only 4 stops that day. 2 stops were for bathroom breaks. Both times the bus pulled up to a gas station, and while the driver refueled, the men hurried the boys into the restrooms in groups of 4. The 3rd stop was for food. As part of this all-expense-paid vacation, the staff at Vanguard Order provided cold-cut sandwiches and apples for lunch. Unless you count the granola bar snacks from the morning and bananas provided in the evening, the Aket had already reneged on its promise of 3 square meals. And to think, Kamau passed on a tray of cookies for this food. In addition to the food travesty, the boys wore hoods for most of the ride, and no one spoke. Most of the boys either slept or sat quietly, shrouded in darkness and emotional shock. The fourth stop was at Camp Furaha. Kamau could feel the bus slowing down. It bounced and swayed, and Kamau heard gravel crunching under the weight of heavy tires. Baba Thulani instructed the boys, "Gentlemen, remove your hoods and place them in your carryall. Then head to the shelter to receive the rest of your provisions." Kamau removed his hood and looked around. There was nothing but wilderness, trees, fields, gravel roads, and an open shelter. It was also getting dark. Kamau thought it must be about 7:30. Back home, if he were out playing, this would be the time that streetlights would be coming on, and he would start heading back to the house. Section 5, Camp Furaha. The boys exited the bus and fumbled their way over to the shelter. There were groans and loud yawns as the boys stretched and took in their surroundings. As they huddled together, Baba Thulani gave instructions. "Approach Baba Kojo to receive the rest of your provisions." When Baba Thulani gestured to Baba Kojo, Mao shuddered. It was a tall, light-skinned man with the barking voice. And again he barked, "Organize yourselves!" As the boys moved towards Baba Kojo, Baba Thulani announced, "There will be no Vanguard provisions distributed to a disorganized, unsynchronized, mongrelized, gelatinized scrum. Now organize yourselves." Aside from the words disorganized and organized, Kamau had no idea what Baba Thulani had just said. From the looks of confusion, none of the other boys knew either. But they did know what organized meant. So, clumsily and slowly, they formed a line. Baba Kojo gestured and barked, "Come receive your provisions." The first boy approached tentatively. Baba Kojo barked, "Name, son." "Handler Gardner?" The boy stuttered sheepishly. Baba Kojo's mouth fell open and his eyes widened as he looked at the boy. "You gotta be kidding me!" He spoke in disbelief. "You don't know your name, son?" Looking down at his shoes, the boy pushed his glasses up his nose and stammered, "Yes, sir, Baba Kojo interrupted him impatiently. "Are you ashamed of your name, son?" Still looking down, the boy began stammering again. "Well, no, By this point, Baba Kojo was in the boy's face. "Didn't your parents give you that name? Haven't you worn that name for these 13 or 14 years? Don't all of your friends and family know you by that name?" The contrast between Baba Kojo and the boy was stark. There was physical difference, of course. While Baba Kojo was not muscular like Jones or thickly built like Baba Ojore, he was lean and solidly built. On the other hand, the boy in line was one of the skinniest boys Kamau had ever seen. He looked like a pool noodle with a big head, like a skeleton with clothes. But this wasn't the real contrast. The real contrast was in their bearing. Baba Kojo was steely-eyed and determined. His every movement exuded certainty and confidence. The skinny boy seemed scared of his own shadow, uncertain of everything. Well, he won't be here long, Kamau thought wryly. Baba Kojo continued, "Let's get your name right, son." He stepped back, looked at the boy, and barked, "Name!" The boy responded, "Handler Gardner." This time he responded more quickly and with a bit more volume. Baba Kojo commanded, "Louder!" "Handler Gardner," came the reply with even more force. "Be proud of yourself. Say it like you mean it. Name!" Baba Kojo was almost yelling. His voice could be heard echoing in the evening sky. This time the boy threw his head back and shouted with force, "Sir!" Kamau watched the boy's head wobble as he shouted. The shouting effort seemed to take all the energy that bag of bones had to offer. Kamau thought to himself, And look at him. Now he's exhausted. Yeah, he definitely won't make it. Baba Tulani, who was holding a clipboard, announced, Alton Bailey, step forward. Alton stepped out of line and approached the front. Your quartermates. Baba Kojo handed Chandler one roll, and he handed Alton two rolls. Alton stammered nervously. Sir, may I ask a question, sir? Speak, Bailey. Sir, what are these rolls? Baba Kojo looked at him blankly. Those are your personalized sleeping quarters. Kamau thought to himself, okay, so those are tents and sleeping bags. He was disappointed, but not surprised. I've got to sleep in a tent for 10 weeks? What type of parents do I have? He watched Jones lead Chandler and Alton up the path. Between the two of them, they were dragging two carryalls, two sleeping bags, and one tent. Alton was wheezing, and his jowls were flapping with every step. Chandler had to stop every few steps and put down some provisions just to push his glasses back up his nose. Kamau chuckled to himself. Who in the world made these pairings? This is going to be interesting. The next boy in line would fall forward. Bongani Bekwa. He was quartermates with DeAndre Everly. Bongani was very different from the other boys. Kamau first noticed him at the check-in. They also sat across from one another on the bus. When Kamau wasn't wearing his hood at bathroom breaks and during meals, he observed Bongani a bit more. Bongani carried himself with confidence, not the confidence of Baba Kojo or Baba Ojore, but with much more confidence than the other boys. He also seemed to be unfazed by the events of the day. He never seemed overwhelmed. Kamau did not previously take notice of Bongani's quartermate, DeAndre, until now. In Kamau's estimation, this boy was not right in the head. He looked wild, wild like an animal. It was not that his hair was disheveled, he was shaved, just like the rest of them. It was not that his clothes were messy, he wore the same clothes as all the others. It was his eyes. He had a wild, untamed look in his eyes. Kamau thought, this is a boy to avoid. He looks like trouble. Kamau was called next. His quartermate was a boy named Raymond Hewitt. Kamau took no notice of Raymond up until this point. When his name was called, Raymond bounded to the front of the line, smiled, and nodded at Kamau. Kamau sized him up quickly. Raymond was about the same height and weight as Kamau. He also seemed to have his wits about him. He appeared to be a very friendly boy. Kamau thought that they would get along well. As each pair of boys received their provisions, they joined the line. Started. This continued until all the boys were paired. Once all the boys were in line, Baba Tulani handed Jones a carryall and a roll, and together they led the line up the path. Two other men formed a pair in the middle of the line, and Baba Kojo followed the back of the line by himself. The group walked for about 10 minutes. Alton coughed and wheezed the whole way. Kamau thought he was going to pass out. His quartermate was even worse. Chandler stopped several times, and for several reasons. To get a better grip on his bag, to remove a rock from his shoe, to adjust his glasses. Kamau sensed that the real reason behind the stops was that Chandler was weak and tired. The poor boy didn't look like he had done physical labor a day in his life. Jones had no pity on him. Every time he tried to stop, Jones reached back, grabbed him, and dragged him along with a keep it moving or we're almost there. The group stopped at the edge of the clearing, and Baba Kojo commanded, make camp. You have 5 minutes. Kamau wasn't sure how they were supposed to make camp. He hadn't heard that expression before. He looked towards Raymond, but it was dark now, and he couldn't see very much. Seeing a few flashlights, Kamau remembered that he was given a flashlight in his carryall. He and Raymond both took out their flashlights and started unpacking the tent. In less than 2 minutes, before Raymond and Kamau could get all the tent parts out of the sack, 3 tents were fully erected. Unsurprisingly, these tents belonged to the Babas. These tents formed an evenly spaced triangle in the open clearing. Raymond asked, have you ever put together a tent before? Kamau answered, sure, but not this one. Not in the dark, and certainly not in 5 minutes. Raymond explained, I've never put a tent together at all, so I'll hold the flashlight for you. He then pulled out the directions, stretched them on the grass, and shone the light on them. Kamau said, forget about that. I need light over here. I need to see what parts we have. Baba Kojo began circling the boys, announcing how much time they had left. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. Go quickly. The other men circulated among the boys, but said nothing. Kamau ignored the time restriction and focused on preparing the poles, sliding them through the sleeves, inserting them into the grommets. You have 1 minute remaining. Can I help? Raymond asked. He tried to sound calm, but Kamau heard fear and desperation in his voice. Kamau responded, Yes. Hold the end of this pole steady in this grommet. Our tent is almost done. You have 30 seconds. Kamau and Raymond finished the first pole and quickly moved to the second. After setting up the second pole, Kamau ran hurriedly around the tent, gathered unused components, and placed them in the tent sack. Time! Kamau threw the tent sack in the tent and motioned to Raymond to place his carry-on sleeping bag inside. Then both boys climbed inside. They heard Baba Kojo yelling outside. Son, did I mutter? Did I utter? Did I stutter? You had 5 minutes. Your turn is complete. It's sack time. Lights out. Raymond was tickled by the exchange. He leaned an ear in the direction of Baba Kojo and couldn't stop smiling. From another section of the clearing, they overheard a boy protest. Baba Kojo, we can't go to bed. Tent won't stand up. While trotting towards the protesting boy, Baba Kojo said sternly, I don't care if you have to wrap that tent around your backside like a blanket. It is sack time, and you will sleep. Are we clear? After hearing no response, Kamau and Raymond looked at each other. Baba Kojo barked more forcefully. Are we clear? The protesting boy responded, Yes, sir. Kamau reflected that he was lying on the ground in a sleeping bag in a tent next to a strange boy, surrounded by other strange boys and men in an unknown place. Kamau reflected on the events of the day, having his house broken into, having his head busted, being kidnapped, yelled at, poked and prodded, having his head shaved, being blindfolded and hooded, being snatched away from his mother and being given ridiculous food. Kamau reflected on his parents' and grandmother's complicity in these events. He felt helpless, abandoned, and alone, and he wept. Okay, family, that is the end of chapter 3. And that also brings us to book 2, which will begin tomorrow. So I'm going to open up the floor to see if there are any questions. And if you have questions, you can just put them in the Q&A. While you're thinking of possible questions, I do want to elaborate on one feature of the book. One of the things you'll notice is that this experience is called the Aket. And so the actual physical campground that the boys and men are at is called Camp Furaha, but the experience is called the Aket. And when I did research to verify the story that Kamau told me, one of the things I was looking for was where some of the African terms came from and what they meant, how they connected. And what I learned is that Aket, spelled Akhet, was one of 3 seasons in ancient Kemet. And it was the period in which the Nile River flooded. And so literally Aket means inundation. And we'll see this more in the story, but I think they regard this experience as an inundation, a flooding the boys into this lifestyle of the way that the Vanguardians live. And so that's not expressed, it's not described explicitly in the book. You may pick up on it from the stories that are told, but that's something I thought was an interesting fact that I wanted to share. Okay, we have one question. When will the book be published? Okay, so the book is nearly complete. When I say nearly complete, the actual text of the book is complete. I'm reading it to you, so we have that. What we are still working on is the cover design and the interior design, and that will go to the designer. The cover design is mostly finished. The interior design is what the designer still needs to work on. He'll be working on that between the next few days or maybe even the end of Kwanzaa through the early part of January. And Once that's done, we'll be able to release the ebook. So my hope is that the ebook will be available to everyone by January 15th. If you have supported the Kickstarter almost at any level, I think it's a $10 level or higher, then you would receive a copy of the ebook. So even if you support the Kickstarter and you say, I want a signed autograph copy, you'll get the signed autograph copy, but you'll also get everything below that, which includes the ebook. And so that will be available mid to late January. And then the actual physical book, once we have it, that goes to the printer. And I'm allowing 3 months or so to get it printed. Um, the past few years have been dicey, and the supply chain for publishing is iffy. Sometimes paper is very, very available. Sometimes it's not. So I estimated 3 months on the distant end because there's been long lag times that have gone as long as 3 months, where authors are or publishers are waiting for paper to get books published. So for sure, we should have those by mid-April. And so if you supported the Kickstarter and you've ordered a hard copy, signed copy, you should get it sometime in April at the latest. Okay, any other questions? I want to again thank you. I appreciate you joining. I hope that you enjoy the reading. Um, I'm not a professional reader, obviously, but I do try to be expressive, and my son has helped me to hone that practice because we read to him quite a bit. So I'm just doing my best to give you a sense of what the book is like. Tomorrow we're going to pick up with book two, and the first chapter of book two. I think we'll get through that first chapter. That will give you a good sense of what Kamau's experience in this camp setting is like. If you're able to join us again tomorrow evening, please do. Again, it'll be from 7 to 8. If you know someone who might be interested, please, by all means, share the link with them, invite them to listen in. If you're on social media, you can go to the Black Kids Read social media. Well, I think we're on Facebook and Instagram, and you can go to our page on Facebook and Instagram. And each day we post an announcement. Feel free to share these announcements. And we want to get the word out to as many people as possible so that our young people have a chance to be exposed to this book. All right, I thank you all. I'll see you tomorrow.